By using fourth-generation virtual reality technology, many works have been born through the method of full-body sensory projection. The only reason why this work is popular, even though it is not a trending game, is because of the way the game recreates a fantasy world right in reality. As soon as he entered the virtual reality world, he was greeted by a vast land with green grass stretching to the horizon. Right after that, he felt the scent of earth mixed with the wind. A rush of excitement surged through him as he eagerly gazed at the horizon. Then he rushed forward, shouting that his adventure had begun to build the nation of his dreams. Many years later, he stood on that land thoughtfully looking down at the empire he built, and the soldiers who were ready to fight to the end to protect him and his kingdom. He exclaimed in surprise at the majestic scene appearing before his eyes. He is the king of Alchimera, the king of Helion, who has gone through many trials and mistakes. His empire has grown into a great power, and now it is finally time to celebrate the 150th anniversary of its founding. Even though he is the human behind everything, the people here are all non-human species. An emotional feeling surged when he saw the results of all his hard work. Before that, the orcs wanted to go to war with him and the army during the national celebration. They even showed enough tricks to provoke, but then quickly surrendered before the real battle began. Therefore, Helion felt a bit disappointed. He returned to his room, started the countdown. He waited for someone to appear. As soon as he finished counting down, the door opened, revealing a fox girl entering, announcing that preparations for the National Day celebration were complete, and inviting him to the stage. He nodded to thank her for coming to give the news, then he used the player keyword to communicate with the NPC, ordering her to come with him to the platform. He looked at her quietly for a moment, smiling as he remembered that Reeve, this fox girl, was one of 3 NPCs he was lucky enough to receive from Gacha in the early days of playing the game. At that time, she was just a low-class race. The second person was a low-class demon cat, and the third person was a rare race of the elf race. Now, the 3 were commanders of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Legions, the nation's strongest military units, along with many other NPCs he had trained, and the strongest of them held command of Alchimera's 8 Great Legions. He felt his eyes sting when he thought about the journey they had gone through together, because he himself had trained and cared for them, little by little, to turn them into elite soldiers. Perhaps because of the festive atmosphere, he began to become more emotional as he recalled all that he had achieved, even though he had not yet prepared a speech for this year's ceremony. But no matter what you say, it won't change anything. He leaned back, closed his eyes to rest a bit, but suddenly he opened his eyes when he felt a strong vibration. He was so surprised that he fell out of his seat because the ground shook violently. He quickly calmed down, raised his head to see what had just happened, wondering if it was a game error or a sudden natural disaster. Reeve immediately appeared next to him. She worriedly asked if he was injured anywhere. He reassured her that he was fine and immediately opened the player interface to check. Quickly browse through your empire. He saw a vast forest appear before his eyes and exclaimed in surprise, "I don't understand what happened to the old terrain." Since the kingdom was still standing, it seemed unlikely that this was a natural event. He wondered if some kind of great magic was interfering with the terrain. The 3rd and 4th Legions are currently stationed in the capital, so he immediately ordered Reeve to return to the office immediately. He ran to the communication sphere in the middle of the room, trying to connect with the nearest base and command. However, the communication sphere did not respond, so he asked it to open the map. A 3-dimensional map of the Empire appeared, and he realized to his horror that there were no marked bases. The entire area outside the capital is covered in gray, representing an unexplored area. He was stunned and wondered if this was some kind of forced transfer. Maybe they were taken to a new land to explore. Forced teleportations were extremely rare events, but he had never heard of an entire capital city being teleported like this. He secretly thought that the infamous game company was up to something else because their engineering team was famous for their strange tastes, and did not hesitate to do anything to tease players if they wanted. Reeve called out to him in panic, causing him to turn around in confusion. He wondered if there had been a psychological mutation, because Reeve is inherently a courageous character. He exclaimed to her that it seemed like the Empire's capital had been forcibly moved, then ordered her to quickly check the current situation of the kingdom. Reeve just stood there, stunned, as if she had absolutely no idea what to do. He immediately said that he would send the minimum instructions to each commander, and that she should contact the other commanders and try to collect as much information as possible. Reeve quickly stood at attention. stammered his response and immediately left the room to carry out his assigned task. He quickly contacted commanders and ordered that they were facing an emergency situation. He assigned the First Army to continue to support him as usual in the role of assistant. The Second Army had to check the safety of the people. The Third Army was responsible for treating the wounded and checking the condition of the barrier protecting the capital. The Fourth Corps was tasked with reconnaissance of the surrounding area. The Fifth Corps provided support for the Second. The Sixth Army will coordinate with the Fourth Army, and the Seventh Army will inspect and repair all facilities. The Eighth Army was ordered to monitor the perimeter from the air and monitor the entire surrounding area. All are required to absolutely not act to provoke other countries, and the top priority is to understand the current situation. He sat down patiently, waiting for the reports to pour in. In his heart, he thought that if this event was really serious enough to ruin the celebration, he would have to file a complaint. Thinking so, he decided to check to see how the other monarchs were reacting to this incident. Then opened the player interface. He looked at the interface and realized no one else was online but him. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, startling him. Then he quickly ordered the person outside to come in. The door slowly opened, revealing Reeve in a drooping state, her ears drooping, looking as if she had just experienced extreme fear. She reported that she had new information about the current situation. The capital is now completely surrounded by jungle, and according to reports from the Sixth Army, this forest seemed to have some sort of hallucinogenic effect, making further confirmation extremely difficult. He pondered for a moment and then decided that it was necessary to form a temporary investigation team composed of the spirits in the Legion. Reeve immediately replied that she would convey this order to the commander of the Fourth Army. She then continued to report information from the Eighth Army. After checking from the air, they discovered that only the northern direction was a bit sparser in the forest. However, it was still difficult to determine anything further from within the capital's protective barrier. Reeve began stammering further reports, but Helion immediately stopped her and said that he had not used any keywords to communicate with her just now. When Reeve bewilderedly asked what a keyword was, Helion was stunned to realize that she could hear and understand his words without going through the keyword system. He explained that he was just mumbling to himself, but she still reacted. Reeve was also panicked. She worriedly asked if she had accidentally said something she shouldn't. Helion just stood there dumbfounded. He didn't know how to answer because he was completely confused that she could understand everything he mumbled out loud. He hurriedly tried to contact the game manager but did not receive any response. He tried to calm down, but Reeve nervously approached him and asked if he had any problems that needed her assistance because he clearly looked extremely panicked and out of control. She gently pressed her forehead against his, making Helion stunned. He was as motionless as a statue. He quietly reached out and touched her face. He clearly felt the warm breath on his skin, a completely real feeling. Nothing like the artificiality often seen in games. Helion wondered why Reeve's cheeks were getting redder and redder, and why she gave off such a sweet scent. In his mind, he quickly formed 3 possible hypotheses for this strange situation. With a panicked expression, he analyzed the first hypothesis is that there may have been a version update applied suddenly, causing the virtual world to evolve to the point where it is no longer distinguishable from reality. The second theory is that this is just a huge joke, and this is actually the real world with someone cosplaying as Reeve. As for the third theory, it's the scenario that's been floating around recently in comics where the main character is thrown into a game-like world, a familiar type of transportation to another world. He began to realize that it was possible that he had actually been transported to this world, and immediately jumped up. Reeve was worried, and quickly exclaimed that she would quickly call the Third Army captain to treat him. But Helion stopped her, saying it was not necessary, and asked her to leave to continue gathering more information. Reeve nodded, telling him to pay attention to his health before turning and leaving the room. Helion sighed heavily and hastily activated the emergency logout command, but there was no response. He sat down looking like a sad cat because he wasn't fed properly. He looked up at the sky. He slowly walked around the room, his mind gradually drifting back to memories of when this game first came out. I still remember how excited I was that morning, the day the first adventure begins. At that time, he only had that one thought in his mind, but now the meaning of this game in his life has completely changed. The online strategy game he is playing is called Tactics Chronicle, a game that is very different from regular war games because the main character does not possess any fighting power at all. In Tactics Chronicle, all of the king's physical abilities are equal to or even weaker than real-life humans. Only subordinates possess superior strength. Monarchs are the weakest people able to lead only thanks to the absolute loyalty of their generals. At this, each commander in turn bowed before the throne, as Reeve announced that at his command, all were assembled before him. Helion sat firmly on the throne, ordering them to raise their heads. He called Balin commander of the Second Army to explain the recent irregularities. Balin stood up and respectfully reported that the security situation was completely unproblematic. Although there were a few light casualties, the citizens quickly regained their composure. Balin is a character who possesses the qualities of chivalry, along with a highly disciplined personality, the one best suited to maintain order in the kingdom. Helion nodded to thank Balin for his dedicated service, then continued to request a report from Altina, the commander of the Third Army. A noble female elf stepped forward and reported that all the wounded had been treated by her unit. When she checked the barrier protecting the capital, she also discovered something unusual. The main road that had extended from the outer city gate had completely disappeared, and the area outside the city was now covered by jungle. Altina possesses a special skill called Holy Spirit Order, along with the qualities of compassion and dignity, because the forest contains illusion magic. Helion speculated that the current situation had not yet been discovered by the outside world. Their immediate goal is to quickly investigate and grasp the situation in the surrounding area. He asked everyone to be absolutely cautious when performing tasks. Helion then asked Reeve if the 4th Legion unit comprised of elite magicians was capable of dispelling the forest's illusionary effects. Reeve replied that according to reports from the 4th Army, since this type of magic was unknown and operated on a different system solving it, would require more research. Reeve, who possesses the Brave trait, is also the commander of a small elite unit called the Guard, tasked with supporting the king in many areas, and is also the commander-in-chief overseeing all 8 legions. She reports that the illusion magic in the forest can be broken using pure force. However, Helion immediately refused, telling them to absolutely not use coercive measures because doing so might reveal their existence to the outside world. Reeve replied that she had conveyed that instruction to the commander of the 4th Army, but in doing so she accidentally called the commander muscle-minded. Helion couldn't help but be confused, wondering why Reeve could talk to others that way. Although her appearance remained dignified as usual, her erect and alert rear tail revealed her true mood. Helion observed every small behavior of his subordinates meticulously, because in this game rebellion was a completely possible factor. He suspects that this instability could be a sign that someone is secretly betraying him, causing everything to become chaotic. In this game, if the loyalty of the subordinates drops and their happiness level remains extremely low, the possibility of rebellion will occur. Once that comes true, Helion, as a weak person in real life, will have to face a war against his own subordinates. He shook his head, thinking to himself that if they really wanted to, he would be willing to cede leadership. At that moment, the commander of the 6th Army, Camilla, spoke. She said that if they received an order to keep their movements secret, they would obey unconditionally, but she had a matter to report. When Helion heard that, he immediately paid attention. Camilla led her unit during the Cold War between countries, famous for her unparalleled ability to gather information. Camilla bowed her head and apologized for her incompetence this time. And she explained that the 6th Army had never had experience exploring unexplored lands, so she was not confident in completing this mission well. Helion realized the error in his calculations and sincerely said that he appreciated her straightforwardness. He told himself that he had to act like a true king. Soon after Helion issued new orders, Balin would stay in the capital to maintain order, while Reeve and Altina would lead troops to explore unexplored areas. Helion decided to raise everyone's spirits, a bit reassuring them that they could complete the mission easily as they were now much stronger than before. And they also did the same thing. The only difference is that this time Balin won't come along. Upon hearing that, both Reeve and Altina were startled. They looked more worried than before, but Helion didn't pay attention and quickly let them leave. When the 4 people left, Camilla sighed, her voice filled with love as she admired the majesty and courtesy of the master to whom she was loyal. If possible, she really wanted to stay a little longer to chat with him, because it had been 3 years since she had met the king directly again. Balin next to him could only smile faintly, saying that this matter could not be blamed, because the other commanders all had stronger personalities, and only the top 3 commanders were allowed to be permanently on duty in the capital. Camilla angrily said that he might not realize it because he was a man, but Reeve's tastes and taste were irrelevant, as was Altina's. Suddenly, Altina appeared with a smile on her face. It seemed like she heard what Camilla said. She asked Camilla what she meant. Camilla tried to avoid it, saying it was no big deal. But Altina told her to kneel down. Camilla hesitated at first. But when Altina repeated the request in a tone that seemed to say that if she did not listen, there would be a price to pay, Camilla immediately knelt down. Altina asked what she meant by saying, "Maybe me too." Camilla stammered that she thought Altina liked women, so she said that Altina smiled and said it was a misunderstanding. She liked men like any other girl, but also liked cuddling cute girls. Camilla said there was nothing normal about what Altina just said. Altina kept trying to assert that she was really normal, even saying that Helion once muttered the same words. Altina says there's nothing cuter than a girl about to cry, causing Camilla to immediately call Balan to escape this strange conversation. But she realized he had disappeared. Balan is now with Reeve. He asked her why she has been silent all this time. Reeve replied that investigating outside the kingdom felt wrong when Helion said those words. The whole room suddenly fell silent before Altina spoke up that she had the same feeling. Hearing that, Camilla breathed a sigh of relief because she was not the only one who felt that way. Reeve confessed to Altina that she made Helion somewhat angry when the forced teleportation happened, but Helion has always been a good king and will continue to be a good king. She exclaimed that all they needed to do was follow his orders and that they would become the force that opened the way for him. Altina smiled and said that it was not wrong to worry about Helion. Reeve sighed in relief, saying she just wanted to let go of the burden in her heart. Helion sighed silently, lost in thought. As he remembered the previous events, he told himself that he had made a lot of mistakes trying to act like a king. However, now that he had determined his next direction, he decided to head towards the North Gate to observe the situation for himself. And he saw rows and rows of soldiers standing in neat rows. I think sending only 2 commanders is too showy. Then suddenly his cloak was removed and a new set of clothes was put on him before he even understood what was happening. Both Reeve and Altina said in unison that the 2 of them would protect him with their lives. This confused Helion even more because it seemed that the king himself was participating in the expedition. This was absolutely not his original intention when he gave the order. He tried to remember if there was any misunderstanding and realized that he had said something like this expedition was the same as before, except that Balan did not participate. That must have made them think that he would also join the expedition, just like last time. He tried to stay calm when saying that this reminded him of old memories, then silently blamed himself for this weakness. The 3 of them set out on a new adventure together. They had been walking through the forest for more than an hour, but the scenery still hadn't changed. The forest was so dense that it made them disoriented, plus the hallucinatory effect made the situation even more difficult. Suddenly, the surrounding scenery changed slightly. It seemed they had entered the area of a normal forest. Altina said that the hallucination effect had weakened, and they just crossed the line between the illusionary forest and the real forest. Helion continued to move forward, but Reeve was immediately alert when he realized something was approaching them. A giant beast looking like a cross between a wolf and a fox appeared and growled at them. The 3 of them remained calm. Reeve quickly stood in front of Helion to protect him from any danger. Helion realized that this 5-meter-tall wolf had hostile intentions and thought that this could be the first strong monster they would have to face. Reeve immediately took action. She attacked the wolf, causing it to turn and run away. Helion felt proud that his assistant was strong enough to easily deal with such a huge monster. After all, he had raised her carefully compared to the wild wolves out there. Suddenly, Altina cried out that she detected something approaching from the northeast. And Helion immediately opened the tactical window to open the map, seeing 2 white dots showing the unknown entity. It seemed like one of the 2 dots was leading the way towards them. Altina told him that she could hear a faint scream from the leader. Helion told them they needed to get there quickly, and the 3 of them immediately rushed forward. And they saw a hooded figure running away, trying to escape a snarling black dog that was hunting her. The hooded man screamed in panic, closing his eyes tightly because he thought this would be his end. At that moment, Reeve appeared in front of the girl and tied the black dog tightly with vines. He wondered what was happening to the vines, and Helion said they had no intention of fighting. They are just protecting themselves. Helion also said that this time he was spared asking the goblin to leave and not cause any more trouble. The goblin uttered obscene words, scolding Helion for being just an ordinary human and having no right to give him orders. At the same time, he loudly declared himself to be the hunter leader of Noblewood. Helion interrupted him, saying he didn't care who the other person was and once again asked to leave, otherwise the situation will become serious. The goblin realized Altina and Reeve were standing guard just waiting for Helion to give the order to attack. So he gave up and turned to leave. Helion secretly thought that just now it was really dangerous. He almost lost his life at the hands of that hooded goblin. The girl who had just run away approached Helion and thanked him for saving her from the goblin. Helion replied that he was glad to see that she was not injured or had any problems. He hesitated when he remembered that he had ordered Reeve to stop right in front of the girl, which would have made them reveal their identities, no longer pretending to be normal travelers. He quickly said that the other two were just bodyguards to protect him, and he himself was just a hired worker who didn't know how to fight. The girl looked at him with bewildered eyes and then immediately burst out laughing. Helion looked at her with confusion, not knowing why she was smiling. The girl quickly apologized for laughing suddenly, then said that Helion looked very elegant when confronting the goblin. But standing in front of someone like her, he was clearly awkward. The girl introduced herself as Lifa and thanked Helion for saving her. But Helion told her not to worry because they were just protecting themselves, so there was no need to thank them. Lifa bowed her head in gratitude. Then she hesitantly asked permission to ask his name. Helion looked at her for a moment, smiled, and walked over, apologized for not introducing him earlier, then said his name was Helion. The two shook hands and walked together. On the way, Helion asked Lifa about the identity of the goblin from earlier, and she explains that her homeland is called Latest Wood, just a small city-state with a city and a few nearby settlements. But still feels like a safe haven. About 30 years ago, a half-demon built this country. About 100 years ago, there was a war between races, specifically between elves and humans. At first, the goblins continuously won thanks to surprise attacks, but then they were overwhelmed by the large numbers of humans. The elves experienced one defeat after another, constantly being pushed by the forces of humans. They were forced to retreat to Dylam. From there, the war gradually ended. She asked Helion what he thought happened to the captured goblins during the 5 years before the armistice was signed, causing all three people to suddenly look serious. She went on to say that with their outstanding beauty in the eyes of humans, those elves were treated as war trophies imprisoned to satisfy their personal desires. After the truce, most of the elves were returned by humans. But most of them were pregnant. Those elves are her ancestors, even after only 4 generations. Half-elves are still not accepted by the elves. Being hated by the blood of goblins and humans in your body is natural. And from there, the hatred for the half-demon began to rekindle. Helion asked what the humans' reaction was, and she replied that humans treated half-elves better than elves, because no elves received decent treatment. Only humans who visited the forest showed kindness to them. Helion now understood that the elves from Noblewood were attacking the half-elves in Latest Wood. The girl nodded in confirmation, saying that they just wanted to live in peace. Yet 3 weeks ago, forces from Noblewood suddenly launched an attack. Even though they don't know why, Noblewood's side only explained that they wanted to rule the city in the right way, under the guidance of a noble bloodline, but she did not believe those words. Helion thought that maybe they were looking to expand their territory to prepare for a new war with humans hoping to win. But he still thought that was very difficult because the strength relationship between the two sides had hardly changed compared to the past. She explained that if they really wanted to take over the territory, they would definitely not stop pursuing escaped half-elves like her. Helion speculated that perhaps the goblins attacked because they were targeting the king or leader. But Lifa said that the queen is the head of Latest Wood, and now both the queen and the prince are missing. The queen is not as good at using magic as other elves, but she is a very influential person who unified everyone and founded this country. Lifa believes that the queen was most likely captured by goblins. Helion secretly thought that not only was their capital occupied, but even their leader had disappeared. Indeed, their current situation was very critical, facing the risk of complete defeat in the war. The only way to turn the situation around now is to gather all the half-demons that have escaped, or to ally with other forces to start a counterattack. Lifa told them to wait for her so she could return to the settlement to report about Helion and the others. Otherwise, the villagers would be too shocked to see them. Helion agreed to wait. Altina realized it was a magic circle and reminded Helion to be careful. Lifa used magic to open the magic circle, creating a portal leading to the settlement. Helion wondered if she was using summoning magic, as she had never heard of such a spell. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the magic circle. Immediately asked if Lifa was okay and then raised his weapon towards Altina when he realized she was an elf. Lifa quickly called the woman Wenli and told her to put down her weapon, saying that they were travelers who saved her life. After some hesitation, Wenli lowered his weapon when he saw that Lifa was serious. Helion felt strange that someone who looked so old would listen to a young girl. Lifa apologizes for Wenli's rude actions, and Helion asked her for her full name. Lifa smiled and introduced herself as Lifa from Latest Wood, both an individual and a member of the royal family. At the same time, she welcomed them to her settlement. Lifa reports that a little further will lead to the settlement. Helion hesitantly nodded and agreed to follow her, not forgetting to pay attention to the soldiers guarding the trees, silently watching them. The soldiers whispered surprise that Lifa would let a stranger enter the settlement, and a human accompanied by an elf. Even though Lifa said they were the benefactors who saved her life, this was still too risky, but they believed that she definitely had a good reason. The group entered the settlement where there were many tents and people living normally. When Lifa returned, everyone quickly gathered around her. She introduced the three Helions as her saviors and declared that anyone who disrespected them would be considered disrespectful to her. People stood outside and observed without any extreme reactions. They just whispered to each other about Altina being an elf and Helion being a human. Helion looked around bewilderedly, feeling like he was a panda trapped in a zoo. It turns out that Lifa is the queen's first daughter and also first in line to the throne. Especially since the queen is currently missing, so she is temporarily taking on the role of interim queen. Helion thought that was the only reason why someone as important as her was alone in the forest, probably because she wanted to save the queen. He asked and Lifa nodded. She explained that the elves of Noble Wood were capturing their people instead of killing them, so she believed her parents were still alive. She tried to sneak in with an elite team to rescue them. When Helion asked why she ended up alone in the forest, Lifa said that the rescue plan failed when the enemy discovered them, before they could get over the wall, forcing them to retreat without achieving anything. The remaining members of the team sacrificed themselves to shield her escape. Suddenly, Wenli stood up and said that Helion was asking too many questions and not showing enough courtesy to Lifa. She began to doubt whether they were really just travelers or not, because there was no reason for Helion to ask so many questions. Both Reeve and Altina glared at the woman, but before they could respond, Helion signaled them to stay back, and he explained that he understood her anxiety over the suspicion. He frankly admitted that they were indeed travelers, and whether they were ordinary travelers or not was up to the judge. He said they came from the Abyss, surprising everyone around and starting to doubt whether they were the Demon King's subordinates or not. Helion denied and explained that he had just heard about it himself. At the same time, he said that they were transported to a strange forest while exploring an ancient citadel. They wandered in the forest for 5 days. When a woman asked why they had no luggage if they had actually been traveling for 5 days, Helion turned to Reeve and Altina, and they both took out the luggage they were carrying and showed it to everyone. Reeve started taking ingredients out of the bag and dropping them into the pot, causing everyone around her to start talking about who she was. They guessed that she might be one of the travelers Lifa had mentioned. While putting the ingredients into the pot, Reeve read the names of each item out loud. Then with just a few chants, she lit a fire that caused the water in the pot to start boiling. The aroma of the dish quickly spread, making the crowd gradually show interest. A child approached Reeve, mistaking her for a dog, and asked if the food was ready. Reeve gently replied that she was not a dog and that the food was almost ready. She asked the little girl if she wanted to taste it, then scooped a spoonful of soup and gave it to her. As soon as she tasted it, the little girl was extremely excited. Reeve immediately scooped a bowl full for her, and she said that she could eat because that was Helion's order. The little girl clasped her hands to thank the gods, but news of the delicious soup quickly spread, causing many people to start approaching Reeve to ask for a share. A little girl called everyone together to eat, even praising the food as better than the food in the castle. Helion observed the crowd and confirmed his guess. People here are not eating well and are clearly lacking food. They have accepted so many refugees that this settlement has exceeded its carrying capacity, and shortages are inevitable. Lifa approached Helion to thank him for the food, and he just humbly replied that he just wanted to help in the way he could. Helion took the opportunity to ask her about the story related to the Demon King and the Abyss. Lifa nodded in confirmation, saying that according to the elves, the Abyss was once where the Demon King lived. There are also many other legends, such as the Lost Forest, where rare creatures appear, or the mystical Forbidden Land. The Abyss has long been considered a forbidden land, and even without those legends, the elves would absolutely not dare to go near that place. Occasionally, a demonic beast will appear from the Abyss, extremely powerful ones able to easily defeat every other creature in normal forests. Lifa told Helion that there had been special teams formed to destroy these monsters, but most had failed. Helion asked what about the ones that weren't destroyed, and Lifa replied that they would rampage for a while, then return to the abyss on their own. To the people living in the forest, those magical beasts were like a natural disaster. They could only patiently wait until they left. Helion silently thought to himself, why did the demi-humans build a city in such a dangerous place? However, he didn't feel comfortable asking directly because he felt it would be stupid. Perhaps it was because of persecution that they were forced to choose that harsh land to live. Helion next asked whether any other race had ever intentionally approached the abyss. Lifa said there were explorers who ventured there. When Helion asked more about them, she explained that many rare materials existed in the abyss, and that was why the explorers, including high-ranking people, ventured into that restricted area. They deliberately hunted magical beasts because these creatures possessed huge amounts of magical power, and adventurers would craft them into special materials. Helion thought to himself, if so, there would be many adventurers coming to Latest Wood, but Lifa didn't understand why they had to do that. However, she said they traded extremely valuable coins. Helion thinks that if it only circulates its currency internally, development will be limited. He also realized that there was no sign of any explorer at this time. Lifa tells that a month ago a group of demons attacked a nearby city. Due to the emergency situation, all adventurers were dispatched there to fight, and then 3 weeks ago the elves from Noble Wood had suddenly attacked Latest Wood. Right after the adventurers had left, it was just bad luck upon bad luck. Helion continued asking about the border city she mentioned. Lifa explained that it was a frontline city for humanity, built close to the boundary separating the territories between humans and demons. Often called the Shield of Mankind, Helion pondered again this story was indeed identical to what he had known in Tactics Chronicle. He even remembered that even the captain of the 6th Division, Camilla, was considered some kind of devil. However, he had never heard of the demon race's territory. Helion wanted to ask more, but his mind felt like it was about to explode from the amount of information. Reeve glanced at Helion when he saw him sipping water while resting, while the dish was very warmly received by everyone. Helion noticed a few children that looked a bit different, and asked Lifa if they were children. She explained that they were so small because they were born from a crossbreed with the halfling race. There are many different races here, and most are also hybrids. Even so, Helion still did not expect that there were also dwarves here, because he knew that the dwarf race did not like the elves. He asked if dwarves hated half-elves too. Lifa explains that many races came together to build Latest Wood. They are all weak people. There is no one to rely on, and that is why they choose to unite. She told Helion that this country was built thanks to the cooperation of everyone. Helion praised the place, and Lifa smiled proudly because she considered this country her greatest pride. Afterwards, while waiting for Reeve to hand out the rest of the food, Helion continued chatting with Lifa. He was worried that Lifa would ask to borrow Reeve and Altina, but fortunately she didn't mention it. Helion and Lifa continued chatting idly from her favorite food and favorite color to her hobbies and childhood stories. Helion silently thought about Lifa's mental strength. Even though she was going through difficult times, she still kept a smile on her face. He thought that if he were in a similar situation, he probably wouldn't have been able to calm down like that. Afterwards, Lifa joined Reeve in cleaning up. Helion quietly opened his chat window and contacted Bolan Team 2 commander. He thought it would be impossible to communicate through the abyss, but strangely only he could see this window. Outsiders only saw him looking up at the sky. Helion sent a text message reporting that he had been in contact with local residents and asking if the situation on Bolan's side was okay. It seems like everything is going smoothly over there. However, at that moment, a cup fell, causing a loud noise, making everyone around alert. Helion started to sweat. Lifa was about to ask him something, but Helion knew he couldn't really answer. If exposed, it would likely lead to an uprising. Because in the game, if the happiness level of the people drops sharply combined with loyalty, falling below the specified level, an uprising can break out. Helion looked up at the status window. An uprising had broken out. Commander Guardi is fighting against enemy troops. He laughed at the weakness of his enemies as if he were mocking them. Bro is exactly that type of person. Helion thought to himself. Guardi seemed interested, wanting to play with these weak enemies before the Grand Commander could arrive. Helion immediately decided he must personally lead to deal with this rebellion. Reeve immediately jumped forward and picked up Helion. She apologized for having to carry him like this, but this was the fastest way to get there. Meanwhile, Helion received a message asking him to protect the throne at all costs, absolutely not letting anyone touch it. You need to stop anyone from getting to it. because if the rebels capture the throne, the happiness and morale of the kingdom will plummet. In addition, he will lose the right to use king skills at the function panel. If that happened, it would be a fatal blow to the entire kingdom. The uprising broke out right in the capital. If the rebels capture the throne and meet all other conditions, the revolution will succeed. And that will also be the end of the kingdom. Helion started to worry. A successful revolution means the game will end. The kingdom will fall into a state of collapse, and all data of the ruling player will be erased. Helion became even more uneasy when he thought about his own fate. Would he also disappear? Even though he told himself that he was just in a dream, he couldn't help but wish for someone to confirm it for him. At that time, a great battle broke out among the soldiers. The commander of the 5th Division, Guardi Bergolmir, easily wiped out the enemy army. He coldly finishes off the weak and laughs at their uselessness. Guardi did not flinch in front of the weak and even seemed discouraged, wishing to face a truly strong opponent. As Helion and Reeve neared the castle, he asked Altina if she had heard fighting inside. Altina reports that the castle is safe. The battle just broke out in the marketplace. Hearing that, Helion immediately ordered Reeve to accelerate straight to the castle. Without hesitation, the two rushed straight into the city. He tells her that they will head straight to the throne room. The soldiers shouted that the king had arrived. Helion quickly contacted Balan to request a status report, asking if anyone had touched the throne. Balan reassures Helion that no one has ever made it past the throne room. Helion began to think about which of them could be the traitor. At first he was suspicious of commanding Team 5, but if Balan was a traitor, the throne would certainly have been seized soon. That's why Reeve and Altina, who are always by his side, also receive his absolute trust. Helion turned to analyze the remaining commanders, recalling that among them, there were people with a selfish, arrogant nature. Some people even tend to be chaotic by nature. While Altina belongs to the group of harmonious tendencies, always looking for ways to resolve internal conflicts, those of chaotic tendencies will act arbitrarily without regard to the consequences. Even among the 8 commanders, there are people with evil tendencies. While contemplating that, Helion knew he didn't have much time left. Balin is currently holding Team 5 himself and part of Team 6. At the same time, other commanders were also carrying out Helion's orders to quell the rebellion. Helion felt confused by the rebel situation. Balin explains that they are the goblins who attacked them before the National Founding Anniversary Festival, and then surrendered in battle. Camilla complains about Guardi using her subordinates to destroy the surrounding scenery. Guardi replied that by doing so, they would not dare to rebel again. Meanwhile, a figure gradually advanced towards the battle. Helion sighed in frustration at the situation. Balin looked worried, but Helion just shook his head, saying he was just tired. In his heart, Helion secretly thought that perhaps he was worrying too much. Just now, when Reeve carried her on his back, he unconsciously hugged her very tightly. Maybe that's why he now feels more tired than usual. Balin noticed that Reeve seemed to be having a good time. He immediately asked her why she was so excited in the midst of a rebellion and what made her so happy. Balin informed Helion that the rebellion was over, and asked him to go check on the situation in the city. Helion once wanted to hold a festival to increase the loyalty of the Ogre clan, but that plan was suspended. When the king is absent while the people are unstable, rebellion will happen sooner or later. Intellectual goblins like ogres are inherently difficult to control, and their rebellion is inevitable. Helion looked at the bloody scene before his eyes, thinking that cruel actions like this should have been more strictly controlled because the excessive realism made him feel heavy. Helion then met with Guardi, who commanded the suppression of the uprising. Guardi reported that he had dealt with the rebels. Helion praised Guardi's work. Guardi humbly admitted that he was partly responsible for causing the rebellion to occur, and he was mentally prepared to be punished. However, Helion did not agree with that, because in his eyes, Guardi had fulfilled his responsibility to protect the kingdom. Helion asked about the leader. Guardi pointed to the floor where the rebel leader was lying motionless. Helion approached, seeing the scene before him. He was both disgusted and felt part of his inner desire satisfied. Reeve approached Guardi, reminding him that the way he addressed King Helion was inappropriate. Guardi explained that Helion had given him permission to talk like that and asked why Reeve was bringing this up now. Reeve replied sternly that no matter what, he had to save face and maintain a certain level of respect. Guardi accepted, then informed Helion that he was leaving. Reeve was about to stop him. Altina quickly showed her peaceful nature, advising the two not to argue. Helion also shouted for everyone to stop. At that moment, the ogre leader suddenly regained consciousness, jumped up and attacked Helion. While Helion was carelessly defenseless, Reeve immediately rushed to shield Helion. In the world of tactics, Chronicle the King is the weakest entity in existence. Therefore, Helion absolutely cannot let any attack reach him. He failed from the moment he let the enemy suddenly attack. A million thoughts raced through Helion's head. He was sure this would be his end, but he didn't want to end here. Ogre's punch hit Helion's head hard before Reeve could come to his rescue. Helion was thrown aside. Everyone was stunned. Tears welled up in Reeve's eyes as she witnessed what had just happened. So the weakest king fell. Helion, who had been betrayed by his own people, met a tragic end. But this is just a dream. It seemed Helion had somewhat sensed it. Enemies are coming in large numbers. Many races allied to overthrow the king. While Helion doesn't have much of a military force, he only had 3 pieces left on the chessboard, 2 of which were crushed. The only chess piece left intact is an intricately carved wolf piece. There was no longer any hope of victory. Helion once thought Tactics Chronicle was just a fantasy world. Therefore, he pursues Romance Forge's friends and lives according to his ideals. Helion subdues the strong, saves the weak. He brought peace to this land. You help neighboring countries, and the result of all that is the collapse of my own dream, an irreversible ending. Even though the last remaining piece is very strong, it still cannot withstand the waves of enemies. Helion had always been preparing for such an end. He had conquered countless countries, created 150 years of history, and in his heart Helion knew that one day he would have to fall. He used to think that when that moment came, he would accept it calmly. However, when it actually happened, Helion only felt fear surging. He couldn't do anything but scream. The garden that Helion loved, a place that should only be filled with magical colors, was now stained with blood and pain. This world should just be a fun game. When Helion raised his head, he saw a bloody weapon raised high, preparing to crush his head. And at that moment, Helion woke up and found himself lying in bed. His face was drenched in sweat. His eyes looked around, bewildered. Reeve was sitting next to Helion's bed. Helion was surprised to find himself in the room again. And Reeve couldn't hide his surprise when he saw him awake. Helion noticed her presence while Reeve had tears in her eyes with joy. He still couldn't believe it was all just a dream. Everything was too real to be just a fantasy. Helion tried to recall what happened. He remembered he was on his way to where the rebels were being dealt with. He also remembered clearly the ogre had attacked him. At that moment, Helion was convinced that he was finished. But now he woke up again, completely safe. Confused, Helion kept asking Reeve all sorts of questions, causing her to hastily tell him to calm down. Reeve reminded Helion not to overexert himself because he had been sleeping for more than half the day. Helion could hardly believe it. He himself had absolutely no memory of falling asleep. But each piece of memory gradually connected, and Helion suddenly realized if his memory was correct, then what happened before was more than just a dream. Helion asked Reeve if he had really been finished by the ogre, and she replied that it was. At that moment, Helion immediately understood the situation. The automatic revival function was still active. In Tactics Chronicle, the death of the monarch does not mean the game is over. The king can be resurrected, but only within certain limits and subject to some penalties. Simply put, Helion was defeated and revived again. He quickly asked Reeve about the safety of the throne and the fate of the Red Ogre. Reeve reassures that the throne is safe, currently guarded by the 2nd Legion's elite squad. She also said that the rebel group had been completely destroyed. Reeve explains more about the rebel leader. He possesses a special skill. The Last Stand skill will automatically activate after the user is defeated, dealing a critical hit to the nearest enemy. At that time, Guardi controlled him, making Altina and Reeve subjective. However, Helion carelessly approached him with that special skill. Reeve quickly bowed her head in apology, admitting that protecting Helion was her responsibility and she had failed. Reeve shouted loudly for punishment, but Helion couldn't bear to look at her like that. She bowed her head to him. Helion told her to come closer and sit on the bed. Reeve obeyed and sat down. Helion held out his hand. Reeve, with teary eyes, approached. Helion's hand placed it on her head and gently rubbed it. He wiped her tears. Helion felt it. Her red cheeks, her scent, her heartbeat. With the salty taste of tears, Helion realized there was no army approaching. No one attacks the throne. The commanders are all alive. The country is still safe. Everything that just happened was just a dream. But now is different. This is reality. Helion began to ask Reeve if there were any other problems besides the ogres. Reeve was confused and stammered an unclear answer. Reeve calmed down a bit. She informed Helion that there were only a few minor problems, but nothing that threatened the kingdom. Helion asked about the commander's situation. Reeve replied that they were still on duty as assigned. Altina and Guardi are managing their units. They both want to know Helion's condition. Helion ordered Guardi to maintain public order if any more rebellions occurred. He had to make the decision himself. Reeve was surprised but still obeyed. Hellion added that even though the rebellion originated from Guardi's area, no one could have predicted that the ogres would betray them. Even though he knew that the ogres were inherently disloyal, Hellion could not afford to lose any more people. Hellion orders Altina to repair the buildings and treat the wounded. They need to improve communication of information. Hellion also asked everyone to adapt to the situation without disobeying orders. The weak king finally begins to take power. Hellion orders Balan to return the throne guard to normal because the rebellion has been quelled. Hellion started to feel hungry. Reeve immediately said he would send someone to bring food. In this place, there is a concept called role-playing, which means acting in accordance with your character's setting. Hellion realized that because he was the king, he could no longer speak carelessly. No more mental laziness. However, Hellion or Misaki Tsukasa really likes role-playing. He's starting to look like an admin on Discord. Hellion thought it was good to learn etiquette like that because he really wanted to play the role of a king. Food is prepared on the table. He told the servant to leave, saying that Reeve was enough. He took a sip from the cup. The taste was amazing. This is the first time it's this delicious in Tactics Chronicle. This made Hellion even more certain. This is reality. He thought that too many absurd things had happened in the past 24 hours, although it was still hard to believe that this could really happen. Hellion began to accept that this was reality. In that case, Hellion thought of a goal. His goal is to return to his original world. Hellion continued to think he wanted to return home and leave this place. Hellion spent most of his youth playing this game, but Tactics Chronicle was just a game to him, so he wanted to return. There was too little information to find out why he was here. He was in another world but couldn't tell the difference. Hellion can still use the windowed system features, a tactical menu for combat support, and information, a reference menu for sharing data, a chat menu for communicating with others, and finally, a main menu for logging and using the camera. Other people cannot see these windows, only Hellion can see them. The data sharing function still works normally. Hellion thought about the ability to revive allies. In the game, monsters can be revived, but only after meeting a series of conditions. First, only people of the kingdom can revive. Second, it is necessary to know the full name of the object. Third, people who have died within the last 24 hours can only be revived. Finally, there is a limit to the number of times monsters can be revived. The revival station only allows him to revive a maximum of 2 times, but having to revive so many times is also due to poor skills. Hellion only knows a few things. The kingdom is currently surrounded by the dangerous forest known as the Abyss, and they are in the midst of a war between the latest wood and the noble wood. Hellion started to feel stressed. He had only found 2 other powers around the kingdom. How much stronger are other countries than the Alchemera kingdom? Hellion also could not ignore internal problems. A rebellion had happened. Before, this could not happen again. You need to think of a way to prevent that. Hellion told himself that if there was another rebellion, there will be a limit to the number of resurrections, and the king is no exception. Hellion's maximum life is 6 times. Now there are only 5 left after the last death. This is a real skill problem for the king in Tactics Chronicle. Losing all your lives means the end of the game, and ending the game means player data is erased forever. His thoughts gradually drifted away, thinking about the prospect of losing all his lives. Later, Hellion chats with Reeve while looking out the window. He told her he was going to ask a strange question, but she should answer honestly. Reeve agrees. Hellion asked her what she thought about the weak. Reeve was confused by Hellion's question. He gave examples like Lifa and asked Reeve how he felt about her. Reeve replied that she felt Lifa was very strong. Hellion said that he thought Lifa's fighting power was much lower than Reeve's. Reeve admitted that was true. She said that if the 2 of them fought, she would win, even if they fought 1,000 times. Lifa also knows that. However, Reeve told Hellion that she did not become a beta for that reason. Lifa always treats everyone as equals. When they reached the village, Lifa looked exhausted, but she continued to manage the people without resting. Even so, they were still dragged into an unwanted war. The people did not lose hope, even though their strength was weaker. Lifa played a big role in maintaining the morale and happiness of the people, despite having a weak body. She remained upright and resilient. Reeve admired this in Lifa. For those reasons, Reeve considered his people to be a strong people. Hellion thought about Reeve's words. Lifa has a power in her way of being. In Tactics Chronicle, if you are strong, you will live. If you are weak, you will be eliminated. Helion tells Reeve that even so she is still stronger than Lifa. He told her to think of Lifa as someone inferior to her. Reeve disagrees. Helion became upset and asked why. Reeve replied that she was a citizen of Alchemera, and that she had also been a weak monster. In her early days, Helion did not abandon her, but also raised her into what she is now. Reeve said that viewing others as inferior would be disrespectful to Helion, so she cannot obey the law of the jungle. She would obey the laws that Helion had created for Alchemera. During the game, rebellion can occur. The Ogre Rebellion this time was easily resolved. However, if the people discover that the king is weak and unworthy to rule, there will be another rebellion. The kingdom will perish. If the commanders betray it, is not right to always suspect everyone. Helion thought that he should not always doubt his subordinates if he continued like that. The king would definitely fall. After those thoughts, Helion finally decided to trust Reeve. He will trust her no matter what happens. If one day she betrays him, it will be his own fault. Helion gave Reeve an order in 5 hours. He will hold a meeting with the commanders, excluding those who are going to occupy. He ordered her to convey this message. Helion said he trusted her. Reeve obeyed and wished to please Helion like a true fanatic. Reeve left. Helion opens the function window. He found that people's happiness index was decreasing compared to the previous check. He guessed that it was probably because everyone was stressed because of the teleportation. Helion thinks the best way to increase happiness is to find the cause of stress. Now he cannot return to the old world, nor can he regain the lost lands. Helion told himself that at this time it would be best to speak before the people to soothe their uneasiness. In Tactics Chronicle, when speaking in public, he only needs to choose keywords and the speech will be judged successful. However, Helion has confirmed that the keywords are now no longer effective. He felt disappointed. Helion began to doubt his ability to speak and reassure his people without relying on the system. 5 hours later, the commanders assembled in the Great Hall as Alchemera's strongest forces. Alchemera's 8 great commanders had gathered in the Great Hall. All the commanders simultaneously bowed before the king. The commander of the guard is Reeve, a fox girl. The leader of the Beastman force is Balan, a muscular lion man. Commanding the Divine Warriors is Altina, an old elf. Commanding the Magic Legion is Celis, another elf. The leader of the Giant team is Guardi. The team commander of the Phantom team is Camilla, Queen of Nightmares. The commander of the Mechanized Army is Robin, a mixed-race human. The commander of the Dragon Clan is Nograd, a Ragnarok dragon. They all bow to the king in unison. Helion thanked them for coming on such short notice. He summoned them here to discuss future policy and the current political situation. The king stood up from his throne and began to present his plan. They are on a strange island where previously unknown races of elves and half-elves have been discovered. He checked their situation and confirmed that they were indeed in a completely unfamiliar place. The king carefully checked everywhere, but there was no information about this island on his map. He also checked the system window but couldn't find any data. The commanders looked at him with confusion, not understanding what the king was saying. Even the king proactively asked if anyone had any questions they were free to ask. The commander of the 1st Division, Reeve, asked the king what map and window were. King Helion explained the window is a space that only he can see, and the map is a function in the window. It displays geospatial information. The commanders looked at him admiringly. Helion thought that maybe they weren't aware of his abilities yet. Still, it was better for them not to know. That way no one will rebel against you. He said there was some new information from latest wood, but not enough. They do not know the dangers lurking around them. This is a very serious problem. The commanders remained silent. Reeve was deep in thought. King Helion called Balin. He wanted to know people's opinions. Balan reported that people panicked when the rebellion broke out, but calmed down somewhat after the situation stabilized. However, as commander, he was worried about the people's stress levels. His army was not weak, but the situation this time was completely new to them. Balin also reported that people will continue to panic until there is a permanent solution. King Helion believes that the monsters only aim for power, but showing strength now will only cause more chaos in the country. Balin continued to present the issue of residents people living in the capital were not affected, but those who came to attend the festival had no place to stay. All the inns were full, and the military barracks could not accept more people. King Helion thought about finding a solution and called Guardi. Guardi immediately apologized for letting the king die right before his eyes. He admits he deserves to be punished. Helion thought about the punishment, decided to hand Guardi over to the Team 2 commander to manage, and ordered the construction of temporary accommodation for the people. Helion also wondered whether this punishment was too light. But as the monarch he had to punish the wrongdoers, Guardi was shocked because he thought that the punishment was too light compared to his crime, and even asked the king if he was really okay with this decision. Next, the king also gave punishment to Reeve and Altina. The king asked them to continue their duties and also act as his personal bodyguards. King Helion decided to go to Latest Wood again to think about what to do. The four commanders bowed their heads. But Reeve called the king back because he wanted to say something. However, King Helion stops her, claiming that the Latest Wood is currently their only source of information, so returning there is necessary. He asked Reeve if she thought she was wrong. But she didn't answer. Helion then called Camilla, informing her that she would also come with them this time. But the duty is not to protect the king, that she would become the nation's ears. Her job is to collect and report information, listening to all the news from the residents of Latest Wood. Camilla was extremely excited to finally be able to develop her strengths. King Helion said that he trusted her with this task because she was the best in this field. Camilla promised not to disappoint him. Helion also noticed the other commanders were looking at me hopefully. He felt that Camilla was very proud, and he also understood the wishes of the rest. So Helion began to praise each person in turn. First, Reeve, who was always by his side, the eyes of the nation. Helion hoped Reeve would continue to oversee the kingdom. Balan is the nation's claw, able to easily tear apart its enemies. Although the future is still unclear, he hopes that Balan will be a support in times of emergency. Altina is the best at handling internal affairs. She is the backbone of the nation. Sel is a powerful magician, can use her melody to sway entire nations. She is the tongue of the country. Guardi is the arm of the nation, with the power to destroy any fortress. The nation desperately needs that strength. Robin is the nation's legs. He has always been the greatest fulcrum, and in the future, your support and technology will be essential. Nograd is the wings of the nation. With his power, he can dominate the battlefield from the sky. Helion hopes Nograd will continue to devote its efforts to bringing firepower to the country. The commanders all agreed. Helion ordered them to take action because the kingdom needed them, and they would not disappoint the nation. In a faraway place, Lilifa is being held captive. Her subordinates tried to protect her, but an enemy female warrior kicked Lilifa in the head. They used hurting her as a warning to travelers. King Helion walked with Reeve, Camilla, and Altina. Camilla clutching his arm. Reeve reminds Camilla to keep her distance. She's out of bounds. Camilla immediately objected, claiming that Reeve was expecting her to do a bad job. In fact, inside, Camilla was so happy to be here, she was pretending to be a weak, lost girl. Reeve hastily explained that that was not what she meant, but Camilla only coldly motioned for her to be quiet. King Helion intervened, stopping the argument and reminding them that they were almost there. Suddenly, Reeve discovered something unusual. Helion immediately asked what was wrong. Reeve said she smelled blood in the air. The wind had changed direction, and from the far direction of the camp came the strong smell of blood. Helion immediately gave the order to accelerate. When they arrived, before their eyes was the scene of many injured people. Helion was shocked by such a large number of casualties and ordered Altina to cure them all. An arrow flew towards Helion, but Reeve caught it in midair, and she immediately prepared to fight the attacker. Helion tried to stop her, but it was too late. An injured female elf was preparing to draw her bow at Helion and his entourage. She spoke up, insisting that they couldn't fool her. When the situation became tense, another person rushed towards the goblin. It was Lifa. She quickly ordered the female elf Wenli to lower her bow. Helion was not the enemy and was not the one who exposed them. Lilifa is in danger for another reason. Helion asked what happened to Lilifa, but Wenli did not answer, but ordered the archers to rain arrows down on them. Lifa immediately intervened, reminding Wenli that she was now the queen, and everyone had to follow her orders. The archers immediately took back their bows and arrows. King Helion bowed his head and apologized for coming at an inconvenient time, but he affirmed that Altina would treat the injured. Lifa accepted help, but was still filled with worry because the majority of her people were unlikely to survive. Altina reassured her that everything would be okay. She used magic to call healing rain. Magical rain fell, healing the wounds of all the wounded. Everyone happily danced in the rain. It was like witnessing a miracle when everyone quickly recovered. King Helion asked if anyone had died. Then he fell silent, his eyes heavy as he saw the scene before him. Too many lives were lost in this raid. Their bodies were gathered into a large pile and placed on a funeral pyre. Lifa looked at them with desperate eyes, surrounded by the cries of those who had lost loved ones. King Helion stood next to Lifa, listening to her story. The attackers set conditions asking them to hand over Helion and his companions before the next morning in exchange for releasing Lilifa and the others. Helion understood the situation well, though it was a bit late admitting that he had nothing to do with the Noblewood people. Lifa shares that the goblin that Helion had previously defeated led a large army to attack the settlement, causing heavy casualties. He is Salawin Welt, the chief hunter of Noblewood, and the general who commands the goblin soldiers. Although a higher rank than the chief hunter still exists in war, it is the chief hunter who takes command of the goblin warriors. Helion wondered why the enemy wanted to capture Altina. If they wanted to target the king or Reeve, someone who had injured the enemy, then it would be reasonable but not Altina. Lifa apologized because she also didn't know the reason. Helion looked at the pile of burning bodies and then turned to look at Lifa. He asked her if there was anything else she wanted to say. Lifa bowed her head earnestly, begging Helion to save Lilifa and her comrades. Helion watched her suspiciously, wondering if she intended to turn them over to the enemy. Lifa admitted that they were too weak to do anything, and even if they wanted to, they couldn't change the outcome. To her, this brings nothing but another tragedy. Latest Wood is no longer a country. The entire army was destroyed, they lost their queen, and completely failed in their last attempt to save the throne. It all ended when Lifa decided to participate. Now that country has nothing left. Helion and his companions are the only neutrals capable of repelling oppressors and holding no prejudice against half-elves. Lifa's last hope is Helion and his comrades. Helion felt like he wanted to help her, but he also understood that such an action could cause discontent, even rebellion in his own country. He could not carelessly put the entire kingdom in danger. Helion pondered in silence. Helion asked what terms of exchange Lifa could offer for the rescue. He needed a reason convincing enough to explain it to his people. Lifa dedicated herself. She was a noble and still pure, high value in the trading market, and her blood is also extremely valuable. Helion asked if she voluntarily sacrificed herself, what would happen to Latest Wood, because that country still needed a queen. To lead, Lifa replied that Lilifa would take over the throne and would become a worthy queen. And she until sold will be completely under Helion's control. Lifa begged him to save her people, then bowed before him. Witnessing that scene, all the other half-demons also knelt down at the same time. Helion widened his eyes at them, feeling shocked. Bowing to a strange traveler is not something a king should do. It is an act of weakness, of submission. Lifa shouldn't kneel like that, but she was so desperate that she didn't care about honor. She really wanted to save her people. Helion silently reminded himself that he was the king of Alcimera. You can't arbitrarily accept something like that, because he will be responsible for the lives of everyone he bets on. Protecting the people of Latest Wood was a foolish act. They were on the brink of extinction, and saving them would not bring a worthy reward. Helping others while ignoring Alchimera's own problems would only make him a foolish king, something Helion was never allowed to become. He pondered and suddenly recalled the image of Reeve bowing before him, remembering the time when she was a weak monster accepted and cared for by him. Reeve swore allegiance to Alchimera, declaring that since Helion saved her, she would obey both the laws of the jungle and the laws of Alchimera. Helion was shocked. This was his moment of enlightenment. Immediately he ordered Reeve, Altina, and Camilla to assist the poor people in Latest Wood. Once they bowed their heads to Alchimera for help, he would not be able to turn a blind eye. Alchimera's foundation was built by helping the weak, and in this moment they could no longer stand by and watch Helion asserts that Latest Wood still has loyal souls, and in the long run, they will contribute to the prosperity of Alchimera. He asked if anyone has objections to speak up now. All three commanders agreed they did not have any problems with Helion's orders. He turned to Lifa and asked her to hold her head high as Queen of Latest Wood. Lifa was shocked to hear his title, realizing he was an extremely powerful figure. Helion apologized and reintroduced himself. He was the king of Alchimera, Helion Edda Elshanok. He warmly welcomed all her subjects and considered them Alchimera's true allies. From now on, they are brothers. He solemnly invited them to become part of an otherworldly nation called Alchimera. Meanwhile, the people of Alchimera were buzzing. The king was about to give a speech, and everyone was eagerly waiting. People began to gather in the central square. The army was actively maintaining order, ensuring everyone complied, and those who disobeyed would face severe punishment from the Second Army Corps. Lifa stood on the balcony, quietly observing the sea of people below. Altina asked her what was wrong. Lifa replied that Helion was not like a normal man from the first time she met. She felt the difference in him. She was extremely surprised to learn that he was ruling such a large kingdom. Altina immediately told her about the formation of this nation. In the beginning, Alchimera had only monsters and only the Helian king. They had nothing. Even hunting a goblin was extremely difficult. They only had a dagger they picked up from a goblin, which was later reforged into the greatsword that Balan now uses, captain of the 2nd Army Corps in use. What Lifa witnessed today is the result of 120 years of fighting and enduring hardship. This year, the nation turns 150 years old and Alchimera is preparing to enter a new era. Helion stood on stage guards everywhere to make sure everything went smoothly. King Helion began his speech. He thanked everyone who came to listen to him. Previously, they were forced to relocate the capital. All of their old bases were destroyed, and now they were in a completely strange world. Those are the results from the investigations. In this world, they were completely alone. The people present here were the entire remaining population of Alchimera. From now on, they will have to be self-reliant and rebuild the new Alchimera current. Food will not last long, and their population has also decreased a lot. They no longer have anyone to rely on. Now they can only rely on themselves. Their current strength is only 1/100th of what it was at its peak. The nation of Alchimera now nominally no longer exists. However, King Helion continued his speech asserting that there was no need to think that Alchimera had disappeared. They were born in hardship. This nation was built from the pain and tireless efforts of its people. 150 years of development shaped what Alchimera is today. Natural disasters, wars. Disasters, they all got through it together. The 8 legions that still exist here are proof of the fruits of that constant labor. There is no reason to believe that Alchimera has disappeared. All the people listening to King Helion's speech today were Alchimera. Helion spoke. If those who agree with him, let them roar in response. The entire crowd burst into resounding cheers. Alchimera is not the only country facing danger. Helion continued, on a trip today he met people from Latest Wood, a small country in power, but with similar ideals to Alchimera. Lifa quietly looked at Helion with affection. Helion continued, the Latest Wood nation has been attacked by Noblewood. Noblewood is a superior nation believing that only pure-blooded elves are worthy of being called elves. They are extremely racist and extremely anti-human. Hating even mixed races like the Monarch's race, they captured and injured many people of Latest Wood. In exchange for Lalifa's life, they demanded that Altina, commander of Alchimera's 3rd Army, be handed over. However, King Helion announced that he would not comply with those requests. He will fight against tyrants and monsters to rescue the people of Latest Wood. First, he would try to negotiate with Noblewood. If negotiations fail, war is inevitable. Noblewood's power cannot be underestimated. And to confront that country, he entrusted this task to a new monster. That is Alchimera. The people of Alchimera are that monster. King Helion asked, where are Alchimera's eyes? The 1st Army responded in unison. They are the eyes they will see through everything on behalf of the great king. Helion asked again, where are the claws of Alchimera, those who protect the weak? The 2nd Legion spoke, they are the claws of Alchimera will tear apart the enemy to protect the weak. Helion asks, who is the mainstay of Alchimera? The 3rd Legion replied, the pillar symbolizing strength on behalf of the monarch. Helion asked, who was the tongue of Alchimera, the one who banished evil to aid the monarch? The 4th Legion responded, they protected the king against evil magic. Helion continued to ask where Alchimera's strong arm was. The 5th Army replied that they would destroy all obstacles that stood in the king's way. The crowd began to get excited and cheer loudly. Helion asked again, where were Alchimera's ears, those who listened on behalf of the weak monarch? The 6th Legion replied under Camilla's leadership, they were Alchimera's ears. Helion asked, where were the legs that supported Alchimera, those who supported the weak monarch? The 7th Army responded. Helion raised his head to look at the sky and asked where Alchimera's wings were. The dragons of the 8th Legion flew in the sky. They were the wings of Alchimera, the masters of the sky. King Helion ordered the soldiers to advance. They will help their weak king win victory and rescue their fallen allies. Lifa looked at the scene before her eyes in surprise. In Helion, she sees a people and a nation who can change the destiny of this new world. At a warehouse, a female elf was lying on a bed wrapped in bandages. Lilifa is bandaging her and apologizing for putting their country in this situation. Lilifa told her to stay still, otherwise the wound would tear open again. She needs to recover before she can do anything. They talk about a queen who is being held somewhere else, far away from them. They wondered if Helion would come to save them. Lilifa placed all her trust in Helion. He was trustworthy, had helped Lilifa before, and she believed he would come again. Suddenly, someone shouted loudly at the elves, calling Lilifa out, saying that she had been with them long enough. Lilifa said goodbye to the others in the room. Elsewhere, Helion was walking with his commanders looking intently at the map. His speech earlier was a resounding success and received unanimous approval from everyone, but they still did not understand Noblewood's true power. Altina prepared herself mentally. Helion turned to ask her if she was okay. They didn't necessarily need to exchange Altina. Altina reassures her that she will be fine. The enemy swore before the sacred three gods that he would not harm her. Whoever swears before the three gods is bound to keep his promise. If you break your promise, you will be cursed by the whole world and become an enemy of the entire elf race. If they violate their oath, the consequences will be unpredictable. Helion ordered his commanders not to attack until he had direct instructions. Their enemies awaited them outside Noblewood's walls, taunting them and threatening to drag them before great hunter Salawin. Lifa stepped forward announcing that she had given the travelers they demanded in exchange for Lilifa's freedom. The enemy allowed them to enter the city. Helion looked around the city. It was only ruins. He wondered if this place could ever be called a country. The enemy elf urged them to keep moving. They were led to another area where a person was waiting. This person seemed satisfied with their attitude. Helion asked him if he was the one sent to negotiate. He laughed, thinking that prisoners had no right to negotiate. Helion calmly replied that he came here entirely of his own free will at Latest Wood's request. Helion asked why they needed a noble clansman like Altina. Was it for magic or not? He said that he was willing to cooperate depending on the other person's answer. The first step in any war is negotiation. And if the people of Latest Wood can be saved without bloodshed, that will be the best outcome. The enemy laughed, calling Helion a useless human. I only know how to bark nonsense without understanding my own status. He also told Altina to mock him. Altina just bowed her head and replied that she believed in the negotiation path chosen by Helion. The enemy sarcastically called her an elf with much more power than him, able to force anyone to submit to her will. Yet she was willing to follow such a vile and pitiful person. Altina calmly replied that her value to humans was far different from what he thought. The enemy raised her hand, declaring that she had forgotten her place as a high elf, and he would be happy to remind her with the command in his hand. A dragon descended from the sky. Lifa's eyes widened in horror. It was a sylph dragon with 6 wings, a most sacred species of the elven royal family. Lifa shouted. She questioned how the enemy had broken the seal on the dragon. The enemy only laughed loudly, sarcasm that an impure half-elf like her also knew about the existence of the holy dragon. Helion asked Lifa about the dragon. Lifa explains that the dragon was given to the elves by an ancient god only mentioned in poems. It was once the savior of the elves when in crisis. After all the troubles were resolved, the dragon was sealed. The enemy mocked them and then got straight to the point. The dragon's power requires a sacrifice. The greater the power, the higher the price to pay. Only a pure-blooded elf can restore the true power of the holy dragon. This is also the reason it was once sealed. The Noblewoods need this power to take revenge on the humans who made them suffer 100 years ago. The dragon is currently weak and needs to eat pure-blooded elves to regain its true strength. Helion looked at the enemy with horror in his eyes. During the past month, captured half-elves were fed to dragons. Lifa gasped. She asked about her ethnicity and parents. The enemy replied that the dragon had eaten them a long time ago, but they did not have enough nutrition. The human blood in their bodies made the dragon not want to eat. If a high elf is sacrificed to a dragon, it will regain its true power. Helion panicked and shouted, demanding the enemy return Lilifa and the others. The enemy has been captured. The enemy has sworn in the name of the 3 gods. The enemy laughed, saying that they had come here because of Lilifa. He threw a bag at them. It fell in front of Helion. He looked in horror at the remains of Lilifa's body. This is all that was left after the dragon ate her. While Helion was still stunned, the enemy continued speaking. Status only exists among pure-blooded elves. If it's a half-elf like Lifa, it doesn't make any sense. Such impure people do not need to keep noble promises until the end. Lifa believed they would keep their oath, but that was just naivety. Helion was shocked. He pressed the button on the window. No one else saw, but they felt the forest shaking. Helion was angry. His eyes were now only red. He blamed himself for being stupid for ever hoping to negotiate. They are dirty people, cannot be counted as elves, even lower than humans. Helion erects a barrier to isolate Noblewood. The people of Noblewood are vermin that must be exterminated. Helion's army began to advance. The enemy soldiers panicked and tried to alert the hunter leader. This is not war, but genocide. Helion ordered the Alchemera monster army to destroy all Noblewood insects,